Ordering decimals. When we have decimals and we want to compare them or put them in order from least to greatest, we need to know how to do that. And the easiest way to picture how to order decimals is to draw a number line. So if you start with 0, and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, we want to order them in terms of which ones are closer to 0 or which ones are farther away from 0 in the positive direction. I'm not going to draw this exact, but we'll kind of get an idea. So if I have two numbers, let's say I have 2.5 and 3, and I want to say, well, which one is greater and which one is less than? Well, I want to picture where they are on the number line. So 2.5, that would be 2 and 5/10, which is actually right in the middle between 2 and 3. So it's about there, would be 2.5. And then you have 3, which is right on the 3. And I want to say which one's less than or which one's greater than. Well, 2.5 is closer to 0, so it's going to be less than. And we can write the less than symbol. That's less than. If you're new to inequalities, and that's what they're called, inequalities, meaning they're not equal, a less than, think of it as an arrow pointing at the smaller number. Or you can also think of it as a mouth trying to eat the bigger number. But this is the less than. The other symbol would be greater than. And you read them from left to right. So the smaller side, you'll read less than. And the bigger side, you start left and you read right. So you start over here and you read to the right. You would read that as greater than. This side of that symbol is greater than this side. So we have less than and greater than. 2.5 is going to be less than 3 because it's closer to 0. Now what if we have a couple other numbers? Let's say 10.6 and 11. And it says compare these two numbers. If we want to compare them, picture where they would be on the number line. So if you had a number line, you have 0 over here, you have 10, and then you'd have 20. Well, 10.6 would be about there, and then 11 would be about there. So 11 is a little bit bigger than 10. So we can say that 10.6 is less than 11 because it's closer to 0. Another way to write that would be 11 is greater than 10.6. Okay, let's look at if we have multiple numbers and we have to put them in order. So if a problem said, put these numbers in order, 3.1, 3.28, 3.06, 3, 3.15, from least to greatest. So put those in order from least to greatest. Well, we want to first draw a number line. And you'll notice they all are 3 or 3 point something. So we don't need to go all the way down to 0. We could start at, let's say, 2. And then we could go to 3. And then we could go to 4. And we want to put these numbers on the number line. So we have tenths. So halfway between 3 and 4 would be 5/10. So this would be 3.5. And then we have our other tenths. So there would be 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, and then the 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, and 4 would represent 3 and 10/10. So let's see where this first number is, 3.1. That's 3 and 1/10. Well, 3 and 1/10 would be just right there on the 10th. That would be 3.1. 3 and 1/10. And then we have 3 and 28 hundredths. So that's 3 and 2/10 and then 8 hundredths. So we would go to 2/10, which is right there, and go another 8 hundredths, which would be about there. So we have 3 and 28 hundredths. And then the next number would be 3 and 6 hundredths. So we go 3, and it doesn't even go to 1/10. It's a little bit less than 1/10. It would be right there, which is 3 and 6 hundredths. So since there's a 0 in the tenths place, we don't even make it to the 3 and 1/10. And then we have 3, which would be right there, and it's already labeled 3. And then we have 3 and 1/10 and 5 hundredths, or 3 and 15 hundredths. So that would be go to 3.1, and then you go halfway between 3.1 and 3.2 would be 3 and 15 hundredths. So if we put them in order from least to greatest, first we start with the 3, and then we go to 3.06, or 3 and 6 hundredths, and then we have 3 and 1/10, and then we have 3 and 15 hundredths, and 3 and 28 hundredths. 3 and 28 hundredths would be the largest number that we have. And that's how you compare, or you put decimals in order. Another way to order decimals is to write them in a column. So if we take those same decimals that we had 3.1, 3.28, 3.06, 3, and 3.15. If we write them in a column where the decimals are all on top of each other, so then we have columns of numbers, we can start comparing the columns and see which numbers are smallest, or from least. We can put them in order from least to greatest. So notice in this case all the numbers have a 3. So that first column just lets us know that, well, everything's a 3. Then we look at the second column to put those in order. And notice that there's one blank, there's one missing. And if you wrote 3 with a decimal, you could put a 0 in. Actually, for any of these, we can fill in the blanks with zeros, just so that all the columns have numbers in them. And that doesn't change the value of these numbers, it just makes it maybe a little easier to compare. So let's look at this column. So we're looking at the middle column. So we have a 1, a 2, 2 zeros, and a 1. So the ones with zeros are going to be the smallest, and we have 2 of those. 2 numbers with zeros in that middle column. So then you go to the next column and you compare those to see which one's smaller. So in this case, the 3 is the smallest because 0 is smaller than the 6. So our 3 is the first number. And then we have 3.06 will be our second number. And we can cross these off as we go. So the 3.6 is the second number. Now we've gotten rid of all the numbers that have 0 in the second column. So the next one is the ones. And we have a 3.15, and we also have a 3.10. So the ones are the same, but let's look at the third column and compare those two numbers. So In the 3.15 we have a 5, and then the 3.10 we have a 0. So let's compare the 0 and the 5. Which one's smaller? Well, it's going to be the 0. And remember, we added that 0 in. The number is actually 3.1. So that'll be the next number, and then we get the 3 and 1500ths is the next largest. And let's cross those off because we're done with those. So the only number we have left is 3 and 2800ths, or 3.28. So that one is going to be our largest number because it has a 2 in the tenths column. None of the other numbers have a 2 in the tenths column. So we know that 3 and 2800ths has, well, you have 3 wholes, 2 tenths, and then 8 hundredths, and that'll be our largest. So that's an easy way to compare decimals, is write them in a column and then compare the numbers from left to right to order them from least to greatest. Okay, let's just compare two numbers and see which one's smallest and which one's greatest. Let's say we have 5.796 and 5.802. Now notice I've already written them in columns. We have columns here. And make sure that the decimals are directly above each other. So we have 5.796 and 5.802. And we're going to compare them based on the columns from left to right. So we start over on the left and we work our way to the right. So the 5s are equal, so that doesn't tell us anything about the two numbers. So we have to go to the next column. And notice in the tenths column we have a 7 and we have an 8. And we can tell from that a 7 is smaller than the 8. So the 5.796 is going to be less than 5.802, or 5 and 802 thousandths. So we have 5 and 796 thousandths and 5 and 802 thousandths. And we know that the 5.796 is less than 5.802.